it's like the Wild West out here, you know? So it doesn't surprise me that people don't have this information because we've never really been taught how to do it correctly, and there is no uniform system by which to do it, and no uniform resources that you can send someone to find out. So that's another thing as well, is like the information on living more sustainably is hard still for people to get.
Hello and welcome to the Plant Paradigm podcast, where we have incredible and insightful conversations with amazing individuals from all around the world and look for ways to create a clean, green and sustainable future for us, the planet and all beings. I'm your host, Tom Simak, an athlete and fellow plant eater who strives to optimize every living ecosystem. Today's guest, and who you heard at the beginning, is someone who really gives a crap. I'm actually not joking. Ashlee Piper, author of Give a Shit and former political strategist turned journalist, TV and media personality and consultant in the realm of sustainability. Her work has been featured on Mind Body Green, NBC, CBS, ABC and Fox News, and she's working with leading environmental brands such as LUSH and the Humane Society of the US. This conversation explores sustainability at large when looking through the lens of you and I as consumers. With that being said, sit back, enjoy this conversation, and I will see you on the other side.
Ashlee, welcome to the Plant Paradigm podcast. How are you going?
I am going great. Is that the right way to respond with how you going? I'm doing well.
Yes, great is a great way to start. To set the context for the episode, because I definitely couldn't do it justice. Your bio is a little bit everywhere, which is incredible. So do you want to give us a rundown on who you are and what it is you do?
Sure. I'm a sustainability expert. I mostly focus on talking about easy, eco-friendly living in mainstream media. So bringing it to mainstream United States television shows and print and digital publications. That's really my bread and butter. And before I got into doing this work, I was a political strategist for a decade. So I kind of leveraged some of that experience into what I'm doing. And I also have a best-selling book on eco-friendly living as well, called Give a Shit, Do Good, Live Better, Save the Planet. And this is, my passion. So I'm really happy to be on here chatting with you.
Amazing. There's so much just from there. You mentioned you were a political strategist. Now, in that field, I'm not even 100% sure what that is, really. It sounds like a very cool title. But you've gone from that to then sustainability. And I'm curious to know what you would even learn about. Is it the way you're communicating to like the mainstream media? Because I'm assuming that's different to, like, you do a lot of work with social media. Is communicating with mainstream media very different to the way you will do that in social media? And are those things that you learned by being a political strategist, or what can we take away from your lesson that you learned there?
Well, that's a great question. So when I was a political strategist, I was largely responsible for managing and creating campaign messaging for politicians and government agencies. So essentially making their messaging more resonant, really getting clear on what their priorities were, that type of stuff. And when I was doing that work, I found that I wasn't able to choose my clients. So because I was working at a firm. So a lot of times the clients whom I would be working for were people whom I was absolutely not personally or politically aligned with. And a lot of times my work revolved around making a candidate who I felt actually was probably not a good choice for the world, be more successful. And at that time, I had become vegan. So this was like almost 11 and a half years ago. And I'd just become that was like becoming vegan was like my gateway drug into sustainability, sort of. And I became so interested in both things. And I thought, man, if people could see how easy and accessible living in a more sustainable way was, and if they could see that kind of where they're a captive audience, like when they're watching TV or they're flipping through their favorite newspaper, then maybe that messaging would be more resonant. And so I completely left that political strategy career. So I did leverage some of my background in creating messaging in a way that would resonate with a variety of audiences, make them feel included as opposed to judged or shamed. and really make them see the truth, which is that individuals are really powerful in the fight to save the planet. So when I started doing all this, there really wasn't a lot of like social media presence, and I wouldn't even say I'm not like an eco influencer. I'm definitely more like TV first, author kind of person. But I've kind of learned as I've gone. I didn't have contacts in TV or in journalism or anything like that. I sort of was just like going on Twitter, trying to find TV producers' email addresses or messaging them, and just kind of a scrappy way to do it, because I just did not see people talking about climate change at the time really at all on television. But I definitely didn't see folks who were talking about it in a way of like, here's what you can do as an individual. And so I thought that could be a really empowering angle. So I did bring some of what I had experienced and done in political strategy to this sort of new career, I guess. But I learned a lot as I went along. I made a lot of mistakes too.
For sure. What I find really fascinating about that is, I would say if you, from like 11 years ago to now, tried to do the exact same process, and this is almost a statement of hopefulness, I think that media in general, I mean, we can exclude some, but media in general are more receptive to messages of sustainability and of climate change. And 11 years ago, I feel like it was such a taboo topic, and there was a lot of education that was missing there, whereas now it's almost starting to become very mainstream, very sexy, very this is what we need to do. Have you noticed a shift in your field when you're talking to, say, mainstream media?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's like night and day. When I first started doing this, I would have television producers tell me in 2014, 2015, our audiences are not interested in sustainability. That's just not something that performs well. We haven't even deigned to try it because it's just not something of interest. And I also was talking a lot about veganism as like a rung of sustainability. And that was also a very taboo kind of topic at the time. Um, and so I've seen just an astronomical shift, and I would say in the past 3 years, where before the receptivity was just not there. A lot of media outlets were sort of like, I don't think so. And even sort of these softer parts of sustainability, like slow fashion or secondhand fashion or green beauty, which I also consider sort of gateway drugs into sustainability. They're fun, they're like easy to get into, they're low sacrifice. Even those topics were ones that folks were like, what is this? Like, I don't know what this is, and I don't think our viewers will like it. And now, like Marie Claire UK has the sustainability awards that like happen every year. I do think it's just become, at this point, if you're a media outlet and you don't have some kind of vertical or editor dedicated to sustainability, you're almost a little bit behind the times, because now you're right, it is such a fixture in the conversation, which is a good thing.
It's definitely a good thing. I'm curious as to what the next step is for media platforms, because really now the way that you're describing it, and I tend to not watch mainstream media, at least for my mental health side of things. But
fair enough. Yeah.
From the clips I see on like social media, because they always make their way, there's a segment, right? And the way that you've kind of described it here is it was nothing to now they've got this vertical, this segment, this, whether it's a specific presenter or whatever that is for that station. Is there a next step that you see in your mind as to how we can progress to more education on these platforms?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to. This is a personal goal of mine and a dream. I would love to be the person to kind of like make it happen, but I would love for there to be a standalone show that is dedicated to sustainability, that really unpacks climate change and the power of individual actions and what's happening with certain pieces of legislation, and highlighting businesses that are doing really good work or activists who are doing good work. I feel like we're all dealing with climate change is something that, like, unless you're an extreme climate denier, right, like kind of impacts all of us. It's inescapable. And we know that a significant amount of people are experiencing climate anxiety to the point where it does cripple their lives. We see therapists are actually saying that they're experiencing an uptick of people who are like going into therapy, and their chief reason is they're concerned about climate change. They're concerned about their children's future, or what it's going to look like in 20 years to live on Earth. And so I think a lot of the way that we talk about climate change and sustainability is very academic, which is great. We need all these like fantastic climatologists and climate scientists who are really doing that incredible work around what is actually happening. What are the real impacts of this? But the problem with that for the average person sitting at home is that it's really cerebral and it's really complicated. And I do feel that overcomplication is sometimes a form of procrastination. So we end up procrastinating a little bit, and it builds apathy in us individually because we feel like, oh, well, the problem is just so Herculean. There's nothing I can do about it. There's nothing you can do about it. And so I think having like a show dedicated to unpacking some of and demystifying climate change, making it simple for people to understand, but really showing them these positive, empowering stories and developments that are making a difference. Because I don't think a lot of people know about the amazing green technologies that are out there. They don't understand what it means to shift from fossil fuels to more renewable energy. They don't understand that, yeah, when they actually try to lessen their reliance on single-use plastics on an individual level, that does make a difference. Yes, when they eat less meat, or embrace a more plant-based diet, that does make a huge difference on an individual basis. I think people don't have a lot of access to that news still. And I would love to see a show that's just solely dedicated to that. I think it would be good for just the overall kind of ethos that, helping repair our spirits a bit. But it would also spread good information that people can actually use. Because it's one thing to read the doom and gloom stuff about what's happening to the glaciers in Greenland or whatever. And it's quite another to leave a story like that with some actionable things that we can do as individuals that can actually make a difference. And I think that's therein lies sort of the sweet spot, where if people leave a story or get information, but they also get an action item, that makes them feel like they are part of the solution. And I think we need more of that.
Yeah, what a fantastic breakdown. I find that very fascinating because as you're describing it, like what we need, I'm finding that there's actually a lot of podcasts in this space that hit exactly that. But the unfortunate downfall there, in my opinion, is there's a lot of podcasts that do exactly the opposite of that because of the varying opinions and belief systems that people unfortunately have, or whatever fortunately have. But what you touched on is something I want to dive into a little bit. So you said that there tends to be like this, the ice is melting in Greenland, UK's getting absolutely crushed by these heat waves, India and Pakistan, they're all going through it. So there's a lot of negative news that we can hear. There's an abundance of that, no problem.
Yes.
But there is, in fact, an abundance of positive. Now, I'm not sure if you've put more thought into this than I have. Potentially you have. I wonder if it's the positive or the negative that's actually more motivating for people to make a change.
Well, that's also a great question. You're just full of these great questions here today, Tom. I tell you what, I would liken motivating people around sustainable living the same as I would what motivates people to go vegetarian or vegan or to care about animal rights or welfare. And I feel like it's a multi-pronged approach. For some people, and I know I'm preaching to the choir. We're on the Plant Paradigm podcast, for heaven's sake. So we got plant lovers here, plant eaters. But for me, seeing a lot of those like undercover sort of slaughterhouse footage, PETA kinds of videos that some folks would say, oh, I don't want to see that. That's too aggressive. I feel shamed. It frightens me. That was motivating for me personally to make a significant change. But I know plenty of people who made that same change because they just really found great vegan restaurants, or it was made really simple for them, or they felt it was good for their health. And so I think there are a lot of entry points to caring about things. And I think for some people, and it's hard to know who these people are, having a more maybe fear or time is running out based approach is something that resonates with some people, and then having a softer touch, really touching on the joys of a particular lifestyle is the way to bring everybody to the table. But I will say, I know that the one thing that does not is probably like shame and judgment. That pretty much data shows will not move the needle on people making lasting changes or habits, especially if they're lasting changes or habits that they don't see as directly benefiting themselves. They see it as, oh, it's something I'm doing that's good for the planet, but it's more inconsistent, or it's more inconvenient for me, or it's something I'm doing for animals, but I'm only doing it for them. So I think really it depends upon the type of person as to what motivates them. But generally, I know we're all needing some relief from what feels like and is a very large and scary problem. And I think talking about individual actions from an empowering and positive place and an inclusive place is the route that I felt has worked the best to make people feel safe to come to the table, because environmentalism has very much fallen prey to the same thing that veganism has, or any ism has, where there's this perfectionist standard, and we see it in social media and we see it among influencers and celebrities, and we think, well, if I can't be like that, then I shouldn't even try. And I think that mindset is really harmful, because what makes more sense, or what helps more, having a handful of people doing veganism imperfectly but really trying, or having that same handful of people not try at all because they feel like it's an all or nothing thing. If they can't be perfect, they shouldn't do it. And the same goes for sustainability. I'd rather have thousands of imperfect environmentalists, which we all are anyway, than to have, one sterling environmentalist and everyone else feels too intimidated to even try.
Yeah, I totally agree with that so much. And I think what is going to be a really big learning opportunity for anyone who communicates environmental justice or climate change or anything like that is finding that percentage of negative to positive news. Because you mentioned something key at the beginning, which is climate anxiety. It's this thing that's really looming over a lot of people. And I feel like people, especially like you and I, that might be more prone to watching those PETA videos, we're more susceptible to the climate anxiety because you are empathetic to what's happening around the world. And
yes,
I think there has to be some sort of inner consciousness that, okay, I am this person, so I need more positive news. And this is where something like a media channel, what we were describing earlier, that focuses on positivity, or on the flip side, if you look at just social media, you need to curate your feed to just have positive news, because otherwise you're going to be crippled, and then you're going to do what some people unfortunately do, which is give up and say, I'm not going to be an environmentalist because it's too hard. It is literally easier for me to bury my head in the sand. So finding that how much percent should I have of negative to keep myself educated, because it is an important part of the education process, I think.
Yes.
And just learning news for the sustainability. And have you found a way to balance that? I need to keep myself educated with the negative side of things, but also keep myself grounded with the positive side of things.
Within sustainability, not yet. And I'll say that because I think when it comes to like how I eat and how I live, being an ethical vegan, I don't watch those undercover those films anymore. It's not that I don't appreciate the heroic work that people are doing to bring them to the fore, but it's preaching to the choir. I already know. And I feel like the kind of arc of animal abuse is sort of static, because industrialized agriculture has been going on for a very long time. So there's nothing necessarily new for me to learn that's going to make a dent in the lifestyle I've already adopted there, right? Like, I'm vegan, that's still cracking. That's been cracking for a long time for me. Nothing I see is necessarily going to change that. With sustainability, climate change is always presenting new variables. The impacts of climate change are ever evolving, and they're always manifesting. So, and legislation around it is also always manifesting and evolving. So I have found it a little bit difficult, because it does feel like just a more climate change feels like more alive in a way. it as an issue
Mm.
and something that really is like up to the moment. You need to know what's happening. But I do also, I try to balance like what influencers I take in, because some folks have different approaches, and I try not to be too steeped in things. Like you said, you try not to watch too much mainstream media, because the world is wild right now and there's a lot of heartbreaking stuff that's happening. So I do try to limit some of that while still being informed, but it's a delicate dance. I think you can never, especially being empathetic people, it's tough to see what's happening, many countries away, and not feel a sense of fear or urgency or compassion for what's happening, and also some anger around
Mm.
the preventable nature of some of this stuff. So yeah, I think it's ever evolving, and unfortunately, also like climate change has become such a political pawn. No matter what country you're in, some countries do a much better job, but like from where I am in the United States, it's very much a talking point, but very much not an action point. And that I want to stay informed with that, because I hope that we'll get to an action point. But it is difficult not to get disenchanted through the process of informing yourself of what's happening.
Yeah, I love that. We've touched on the word sustainability a few times, and I think it's important maybe for everyone to, I guess, for this question to be answered. What does sustainability mean to you?
Yeah, I like how you phrased that, because I don't claim to be the gatekeeper arbiter of like sustainability. And the way I went about approaching my book was very much like I don't know if you had these in Australia, but these choose your own adventure books as a
Yeah.
kid, where you would like read them and then you could hop to one chapter, another chapter, if you wanted to have kind of a different experience. That's how I approach sustainability. I really feel that there are lots of different rungs of sustainable living that people can pursue and try. And some of those are going to work for some people, and others are not going to work for people at all. And I have those even in my life. Like, there are things that people ask me, would you just not use any plastic? And I'm like, that's no, I still have things in plastic at times. So or some folks may not be able to embrace eating in a more vegan or vegetarian way, or however they feel comfortable labeling it. While others, that's a really easy switch for them. So to me personally, living sustainably, I think really just means being mindful and intentional about the choices we make. And for me, that includes everything from being personally vegan, trying to eat more locally and seasonally, um, low consumerism whenever possible. When it comes to new goods, I'm doing a challenge right now on my Instagram and writing a second book on this thing I call No New Things. And it's really meant to be, you can certainly acquire things secondhand, and you can go to the grocery store and the farmer's market and stuff. But when it comes to clothing and things in your home and, all that stuff, it's really focusing on secondhand first, or using what you already have, or borrowing or renting, as opposed to going out and buying new things. Because I do believe the more we consume, we live in a capitalist world, the more we consume, the more industry is going to produce. And we already all exist with an overabundance of stuff. Well, I shouldn't say all. If you're in a privileged space, you probably have more than enough stuff.
100%.
Obviously, there are plenty of people who do not, so I don't want to trivialize that. But so I think it's about being mindful about those choices, and constantly being open to growth and evolving. Like, my sustainability now is different than it was 10 years ago. And because there are things I've learned, or I've tried new things that I found worked better. But am I home sewing my own clothes and milling my own grain? No. Are there people who do that? Yeah. Do I live off the grid? No. Are there people who do that? Yeah. And that's also helpful. So I think it's very much about like what can work with your lifestyle, but also being open to tweaking and trying things to consistently add more in. And I find sustainability is actually like that. Sustainable living, I feel like people, once they try one thing that they thought was a little bit difficult, and they succeed at it and they see that it's a lot easier, it kind of becomes electric. They sort of want to keep that momentum going. They're like, oh, damn, this was easier than I thought. Maybe I can try bringing my own cup to the coffee shop, or maybe I can try buying, things in bulk or whatever it is. And so I think that's a good part of sustainable living. And I also think you need community, whether you have it built in wherever you live, or you find it on social media, or you find it in books, or whatever it is. I think that people who are newer to setting foot into more eco-friendly living, they need us who are more experienced in it to really celebrate like every win, everything that they try. Because, the more that we're going to be celebratory and welcoming to folks, the more they're going to want to stay and do more.
100%. There's so much in that I want to dive into, but your last point,
yeah.
your last point's actually crucial. I recently finished reading How to Win Friends and Influence People, and I do
Dale
talk about
Carnegie.
that. That's it. I talk about it actually being a fantastic activist book, because at the end of the day, our sustainability, those that are passionate about veganism or sustainability or environmentalism or climate change, we have an agenda, and our agenda is to reduce the carbon footprint, reduce suffering, all these things, and knowing how to do that is crucial. And one of the principles that is taught in the book is talking up a good step for anyone will promote more good steps. And that's something so simple that everyone can apply. But you mentioned that there are things that are maybe too hard for you at the moment, such as sewing your own clothes. And it's something I definitely don't do either, or growing your own wheat. There's a lot of things I think excite us about being sustainable. So one thing you mentioned is going to like your bulk food shop and getting rice that way, or pasta, or whatever you do get that way. But there are certain things that I think we don't do. For example, you were at one stage not taking your keep cup to the coffee shop. Everyone was, right? There was a stage where that transition happened, and then you're now, I'm assuming, made that a habit. So I'm wondering if, through your 11 years of going on this journey of sustainability, are there still things you look at like, I really want to try that thing, or that is too hard for me at the moment, but I'm excited to do that in the future? Are there categories that you are not doing right now that you are excited about?
I think since COVID, a lot of the sustainable measures that had been habitual for many of us were kind of put on hold, because all the bulk stores near me for almost 2 years were totally closed. And places you would go get a beverage or takeout were not letting you use your own containers. So I'm kind of finding my way back to making that habit as things have opened back up and those have become more possible. So I'm glad to have those pieces be kind of back in my life, back in the habit. As far as things that I haven't really tried yet, this ain't my first rodeo, so there's not a lot I haven't tried. But I will say I'm really interested in, and I'm not in a place to do this like spatially, like where I live, but I'm really interested in these folks who grow their own food and do foraging. I think that is like so next level kick ass, while also being extremely old school and awesome. Because a lot of stuff that's sustainable isn't new. Indigenous communities have been doing it forever. Our great grandparents were doing stuff like that. My grandmother passed away when she was almost 109, just a few weeks shy of it.
Wow.
And she was like the OG of sustainable living, because she grew up in the Great Depression. She didn't waste anything. She would have like expired yogurts in her fridge for like months. She was just she would wash and reuse foil. She was just so sustainable. So there's nothing really new under the sun in sustainable living. But I do, I really admire people who are becoming kind of more self-sufficient when it comes to their food supply. I find that really cool. And that's not something I have any expertise in, but I really appreciate that that's out there. So I'm excited to try it at some point. I'm trying to think what else would be. Used to travel a lot. I haven't traveled nearly as much as since COVID, but I'm always really I like challenges, and I'm really in awe of these folks who do not take planes places, which kind of limits where you can go if you live in the United States, because you can drive around, or take trains or whatever, but then you'll never go to Europe or wherever.
Yeah.
But I find that really interesting, not from the standpoint of you have to do that to be sustainable, but rather I like kind of trying things that seem really tough. Like I didn't buy anything new for an entire year because I wanted to see if I could do it. And I actually found a lot of joy in doing that. It was a great experience. So I like those little challenges as well. So maybe I'm a little masochistic, but that that would be something else I think is kind of cool to try.
Look, as someone who is passionate about reducing my waste, buying something not new for you, let's go into it for a second. So what does that really look like, and what were, in particular, I want to know if there was something that you just couldn't buy because you couldn't get it new. Like I'm imagining there's rules, like if you needed, like, I don't know, underwear, that's coming to my mind. Like
Yeah.
I there's one thing I probably wouldn't buy pre-owned, to be honest. But
Yeah,
what
that's fair.
were the things that or talk us through that experience from yourself?
Yeah, so I started doing it in 2014, and then between 2015 and 2016, I did it for an entire year. So I would kind of do it in drips and drabs, be like, okay, let's see if I can do it for a month or 2 months. And then I was like, I think I could do this for 3 months, and then 3 months turned into 6, and 6 turned into a year. And the parameters were somewhat flexible. So things I could, of course, go get like medical services. And if I needed medicine, that's fine. Same for my pets, same for my car, same for my home. If there were repairs that needed to be made and there was like a special part, I'm not going to, sit and have my car in the shop for a year because I insist on, finding this specific, spark plug or something secondhand. So I was able to do those things new as needed. And then, of course, I bought food new as well. So this wasn't like a dumpster diving freegan kind of situation. But when it came to pretty much everything aside from basic necessities, so I had a few like toiletries that were like considered basic necessities, like a bar of soap or, razor blade replacements or whatever. But I focused on using up the things that I already had. So I had loads of shampoo and like conditioner and stuff like that. So I focused on using that up. I focused on using up the makeup I already had. The clothes I had, that's what I had. And then if I needed something secondhand, so I actually did need some underpinnings at some point during the year. And I ended up finding them new, but secondhand on like these online retailers like Poshmark or Mercari or Depop. It's actually amazing. People will buy so many things and then completely forget that they've bought them and then forget to return them. And then they'll try to sell them. So I was actually able to find exactly the kind of bra I would wear, exactly the kind of underwear I liked, new, never had touched somebody else's privates or anything like that, but finding it ostensibly secondhand. So that was kind of my guidepost. And then when it came to, for instance, if I needed a book for a class or that I wanted to read, I would find that through the library or I would borrow that from someone. If I needed, like I do a lot of TV segments, so I need kind of TV worthy clothes, and I either procured those secondhand or I went to friends' houses and we kind of had fun putting stuff together. And if I needed something for work, usually I could find it secondhand. I think, and gifts as well. I would allow myself to give money or experiences to people or take people out for meals. Those weren't off limits at all. I could make donations. But I just wasn't buying new things. And so I found it was actually pretty easy. There wasn't anything that I couldn't get. If anything, it was just there may have been a delay in getting something I needed, which actually I found that delay helpful because in the time I would be looking for that thing secondhand or borrowing it or whatever, it really put in like a forced pause that we don't really have when we go to buy something new. I mean, think about it. Not you necessarily, but like companies market to us pretty significantly. They try to make shopping on our phones extremely easy. Our credit card information, our PayPal or whatever is right there loaded in. So all we have to do from social media or from a website is just click a button and it's there. Your address is auto loaded. They like to make it super easy for us. And now there are all these like layaway programs too, or pay as you go programs like Afterpay and Klarna. And those are really like, hey, even if you don't have the money, you can just pay us $5 now, and then we're going to hit you with a lot of interest later or whatever. So I found that like so much of our society, so much of how we've been programmed is to just buy things and not think, buy on impulse. And it's actually been studied that like women, especially, about 92% of our purchases are not utilitarian, AKA we don't actually need them. They're more emotionally and subconsciously driven. So if we're stressed out,
92%.
yeah. So
Oh
if
my
in this
goodness.
particular study, but if we're stressed out, now men are, I don't mean to gender it, but it was gendered by like men and women. There were no kind of non-binary demographics, but men did better as being more utilitarian shoppers than women. They're less emotionally motivated, at least in this study, to buy things. But women were almost 100% motivated to buy things based upon how they felt. So if they felt sad, if they felt excited, if they felt stressed out, if they had a hot date, like whatever, they got a promotion, so and companies know this because at least American companies allocate about 80% of their marketing budget to marketing to women, which speaks volumes. They know, I mean, in the US as well, women make up for 3/4 of all of the consumer purchasing in the country. So, and that's not to like slam women or anything. It's just to say we're like a really powerful purchasing group. And I found like forcing myself to find something secondhand, not even forcing myself, choosing to find something secondhand might have taken a little bit more time, but in that time, it would give me the pause I needed to really evaluate if I needed it in my life. And I hadn't looked at the way I buy things and my relationship to things like that before. Because when I was a political strategist, I was making a lot of money. I was working extremely long hours, and I would shop as almost like therapy, like almost as relief, from a stressful
Mm.
day or a reward from a stressful day. And I never really thought about like, do I need this thing? I'd be like, I can afford it. I like it. Let's go. And so have like really like seeing my relationship to that was super interesting, and having the time to see if I needed something, even if I was to get it secondhand, was really interesting. And a lot of times I found I didn't need it. I mean, you hear this from people who like backpack around the world and stuff, and they travel pretty lightly. They're like, nah, man, I don't actually need a lot of that stuff. All the things I thought I really needed, one, didn't make my life easier or more convenient, and two, actually like were heavier and made me less happy. So I'm not anti things. I love things. I love beautiful things and fun things. But I think the challenge was really good for me to recalibrate my relationship to just consumerism generally.
Do you feel like it's really left an impact in your life and the way you do things? Like, and the reason I'm asking this question is because I listened to a podcast recently. I think it was Johan Hari, the guy who just released this new book called Focus. And he talked about how he went to like a cabin in the woods somewhere for 3 months without any technology to try to rewire his brain to focus again on just reading a book for 6 hours or just that whole thing of, we can only focus on something for like a minute. And he, in his experience, he went back and he's like, oh, my life has changed. But a month later, he starts to regress into old habits. So the underpinning of my question is, did you find some regression, or did you notice that you've made sustainable change because of like a mindset shift or something?
So kind of both. I think when I first started doing it in smaller portions, I was like, couldn't wait for the month to be up. I had like my little trigger finger ready to hit the iPhone and buy something that I'd been eyeing for like a month. When I did it for a year, I really found that it was almost like I can only equate it to like when I've done a juice cleanse or something. Like during the juice cleanse, I'm sort of like, can't wait to eat real food. And then after that, you're almost like you're feeling really good. So you're like, I mean, I don't need to like subsist on juices, but I could kind of keep this going for a little bit longer. So I felt like the habits really stuck. And I do know new things myself a few times a year. So I'll do it a month or, 2 months at a time. Like I'm doing it right now with like my followers and people who've signed up to do it because I just find it really personally edifying. But I still find one of the things I do is I browse. That's like one of the things I still do. I've never been a big like in-store shopper, but I'll browse online on a website and it's almost like become its own time suck. So this time around that I'm doing no new things, I've really tried to kind of limit any time on like those tempting websites to even browse things. I think I'm just like a curious person and I like looking at stuff. I don't necessarily need to buy it. But yeah, the lure of we don't realize, but like these devices are really powerful and, marketers and social media companies know that. They know we're hooked on it. We're captive to it. So even if you do a pretty staunch challenge for a while and you've changed your habits, that siren song there is tough to ignore sometimes, which is why I keep kind of checking in with myself little by little and doing the challenge every year a few times.
Yeah, it's definitely a great way to stay engaged and stay, I guess, putting yourself in a mode of discomfort, and which allows your brain to start becoming more neuroplastic, and then you start learning things, your brain's growing.
Yes.
Something you mentioned earlier, which is you donate some of your stuff and you get a lot of your stuff
Mm-hmm.
secondhand. So there's a lot of cyclic economy kind of system going around. And something you said in an interview once is that 80% of the things that you donate go into landfill. I think that was the stat that you mentioned. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, so that's a US stat. And sorry for your listeners, a lot of my area of expertise is obviously in the United States. We're also the most disproportionate polluter in the world, so I feel like it's a good place to start. That statistic is really from the beginning of COVID. So we know that donations, and I call them kind of like indiscriminate donations. It's when you donate to like a Salvation Army or a Goodwill or, these planet boxes that we have in the US. And there might not be equivalents in other countries because I've lived in the UK and Croatia, and I feel that they actually handle donations a lot better than we do. There are like legitimate charity shops that process them and sell them, and people have a better understanding of what they can donate that actually can be resold. Here, I think we have so many things, and with the onset of COVID, people were sitting in these four walls of their homes going, oh shit, I got a lot of stuff. And so there was like the Marie Kondo show on Netflix, and there was the Home Edit that came out. And so people were like, well, what else I can't go out to the pub. I can't go out to a restaurant. I can't see my friends. So I'm going to purge my house. I'm going to organize, or whatever. And they would just fill up garbage bags and then dump them off at Salvation Army or something. And there was such an influx during the pandemic of donations at these places that were already pretty like spread thin, that they were saying around 80% of it, either they don't have the facilities to house it, they don't have the people to process it, or they don't have any aftermarket for it. So, sorry, but like nobody's going to buy like a single sock with a hole in it, and so people were donating so much just crap that 80% of it was going straight to the landfill without ever even being processed. And I think that's important because I talk about like something called ethical offloading. And that's really like you're responsible for the end life of your things, whatever that end life looks like. And to some people, that might be composting something, recycling it, repurposing or upcycling it. And also making sure that if you're donating it to a place, that place actually needs it. There are plenty of shelters that will take toiletries and will take, certain bedding and stuff like that. But there are a lot of places that can't do anything with your stained mattress. Like you're going to have to pay to get that recycled. There are a lot of places that don't need your busted toaster, like they're just, if it's not of use and good quality to you, chances are a place cannot resell it. And so it's not truly donated. And we also have a problem here where a lot of our clothing donations just get shipped to developing countries to become their trash and their problem. And it's kind of under the guise of charity, like, oh yeah, let's ship all these novelty shirts to Ghana, and like, they're going to love that there. And it's like, this is absolute trash for these people. We've just made an already struggling community struggle more with our trash. So that's kind of where the statistic came from, and why I feel like it's so important to look at not just what you bring in, but while you're looking at what you bring into your life, being intentional about how you're letting things exit your life, because the two are really interrelated.
Yeah, that's very fascinating. It's out of sight, out of mind. And it's fascinating how people are treating or can treat these donation bins like bins.
And like trash.
It's really strange. Like we definitely, in my own life, I don't own much. So if I donate something, it's like 10% of my belongings. But yeah, amazing. I definitely implore people to really, really look at that and assess whether they are responsible for that. And there's lots of different options. Like, you mentioned the toaster example, as an example, and there's e-waste recycling centers around. It doesn't have to go to this Salvation Army or whatever it is. And there's lots of different alternatives. And if you're not sure, I don't know if you have a recommendation of where to send people, but go Google it. Just Google, where do I put my broken toaster? And there's going to be a resource there for you, whether it's an actual non-profit that takes these and recycles it, whether it's a council thing and they do it at a municipality level. Do you have any places that you would send people to learn about these types of things?
I mean, unfortunately, it really is the internet. It depends upon, especially in the United States, recycling, even specialized recycling programs are so municipality and locally based. So there are a few companies, like for instance, if you came to me and you said, yo, Ash, I've got this AirPods case, doesn't work anymore. I've got this charger I don't need for anything. I would say, oh, okay, well, mail it into Nimble for Good. That's a national company that will recycle it into other kinds of cords and things that people will use. But by and large, most programs are going to be kind of more local. They're going to be like, there's a company in Chicago, an organization in Chicago that takes youth who are interested in computers, and they'll take your donated and broken computers, and they teach those kids, and also like re-entering offenders. They have kind of a variety of populations they work with, but all of which are populations that really deserve hands-on training so that they can then transition into a good job. And they teach them how to fix these computers. And they teach them the nuts and bolts of what's in these computers and stuff. So the people who come out of these programs are like, boss, they could just like fix damn near anything. But that's a great place to like donate. But that's something that's very Chicago specific. I have another place that I know of that takes old tools, old crafting supplies, old sewing machines. And it's kind of like a stuff library for people who are into home improvement or crafting, which is really interesting. I know other countries have things like that are more prevalent. We don't, but it's becoming more popular. But it really is, when people ask me about both general recycling in the US and also specialized recycling, and I'll go on these national shows and they'll say, okay, tell us how to recycle correctly. The first thing I always say is, well, it really depends upon where you live, because there's no uniform standard of recycling in the United States. I could literally go to the town next to me and they accept different things. Some will accept batteries or light bulbs, but some won't accept like pizza boxes or milk cartons. It's just like it's like the Wild West out here, So it doesn't surprise me that people don't have this information, because we've never really been taught how to do it correctly. And there is no uniform system by which to do it, and no uniform resources that, you can send someone to find out. So that's another thing as well, is like the information on living more sustainably is hard still for people to get. I think people are really well-intentioned, but it can be tough. And sometimes it can be expensive. Mattress recycling here by and large is you have to pay for it. Unless you've bought a new mattress and the company will handle the recycling, but like true mattress recycling, not putting it out in the alley for, like the garbage collector to deal with, it costs money. And I think that lack of education, lack of uniformity, and expense are all deterrents for people to, offload their belongings in a more eco-friendly and ethical way.
Yeah, I've always found recycling to be like the bane of a lot of people, because even as someone who's into the space, I'm
Yeah.
still confused sometimes. Admittedly,
Sure.
I'm still confused. I don't understand, especially because, like you said, with the states, it changes on municipality. It's the exact same in Australia. So depending on which council you reside within, it's different. And for us, where we used to live, didn't accept aluminum foil, but then when we moved, they accepted foil. So it's like new. And the
Okay.
only way for us to find that out is actually by going to the council's website, and they have a checklist of what they can and can't accept. But there was so many steps needed to take to come to that one conclusion. And the reason I think this is really important and something I think has to be addressed, and I think maybe this falls on government educational programs for them to address, is that there has to be some sort of uniformity or a resource, like you said, some sort of global, at least nation specific, so US specific, Australia specific. I don't know if a global resource would be viable, because there's like millions of councils that would just recycle different things. But I wanted to piggyback on this topic because recycling is something that's both basic and expert level of knowledge, because it's a good starting point for a lot of people. But I wanted to know, based on your long-standing experience in the field, but also the way that you communicate with other people, if someone's looking to get into sustainability, as like, I watched this documentary and there's so much wrong in my life, I think I don't know where to start. How would you begin to wean that person is, hey, this is where you should start. This is the things that you should think about. Where does your mind go in that circumstance?
I actually get asked, I think the number one question I get asked is either what would you recommend to a beginner, or what would you recommend to an individual? Like, what's one specific action you would recommend to an individual that has the biggest positive impact? And my answer is the same for both. I think we have really good longitudinal data that supports that animal agriculture, both the transportation associated with it and the pollution associated with it, is one of the most polluting industries on the planet. And I'm not talking about folks who live in communities where they're subsistence hunters, or where it's, a very cultural norm to kind of do hunting. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about people like me who used to go to Walmart and buy chicken, that doesn't look like chicken, all that stuff. So the first thing I always tell people is see if you can do a meatless meal. Like, let's start there. Like, see if we can transition a little bit how we eat, especially now. I mean, shit, man, it's so much easier now than it was like 11 years ago. I don't know how long if I can ask, like, how long you've been riding this. Yeah. So even still, in 7 years, stuff's gotten super lit. It's gotten a lot better. So, I mean, that's one of the number one things I recommend to people. If you really want to, as an individual, have a significant impact, I think that's a great place to start. As an individual of privilege, again, I know vegan foods can be inaccessible to some folks. They can be expensive in certain places. And I'm not saying you have to eat all processed vegan foods, that are packaged. I just mean, like, for heaven's sakes, let's move away from the meat if it's possible. I think as folks of privilege, that's like kind of the least we can do. And it's a really enjoyable step at this point. So if you're medically able to do that, that's my number one recommendation. The second thing is just to buy less stuff. I mean, I think a lot of times people be like, oh, do I need to buy a hybrid or an electric car? Or do I need to get solar panels on my house? And I'm like, all those are cool, but let's walk before we can run. These are actually really simple things that we have the data that supports that these are directly contributed to accelerated climate change. Like, we know, I did a TED talk on this. We know that post World War II in the United States and in Western Europe, like after World War II was won, honey, we were ramping up industry and we were telling everybody, buy a bunch of shit, buy stuff. And the correlative emissions associated with the post-war industrialization, you can see that spike on any chart you look at, and then you can see it continue to go up because we haven't changed our consumption habits. So I think there's a kind of a way of really looking at, I mean, that's why I do no new things. I consider it to be inextricably linked with sustainability. The fewer things that are new that you buy, the less demand there will be to produce those things, the less fossil fuels used to produce those things, the less you actually have to contend with, how do I offload this item when it's done? So, it's really just lessening consumption of animal products and lessening consumption of the things that you buy. And that doesn't mean you can't have those things occasionally or whatever works for you, but even taking steps that, I mean, imagine like people kind of boohoo on Meatless Mondays or those incremental things, but I think that's actually been really powerful. If you get a whole school or a hospital or an office that's doing Meatless Mondays like consistently, damn man, that's a lot of less meat. That's a big deal, and we know that that works. We know that on an individual consumer level that works, because if it didn't, you wouldn't see these large animal agriculture companies buying vegan and vegetarian food companies. We've gone from like the fringe to the fore. We have become an extremely powerful consumer demographic. Veganism and vegetarianism, they're not phases, they're not fads. They're like absolutely here to stay. And corporations know this now, but they only know this because individuals started making those choices. We didn't need to wait for government officials to legislate that or, to make that a law. These were individual choices people like you and me were making. And then businesses were like, well, shit, I'm losing profit share on milk or whatever. So I guess I'll buy an oat milk company or, whatever it is. So I believe that, we can feel really bedraggled by climate change and feel like we're just a small fish in a huge overheating pond. But really the choices that we make, the things that we buy are incredibly important and incredibly impactful in how this is going to go. I'm not saying we hold all the responsibility, but we have more power than we think.
What a fantastic testimonial to the perspective. And I would almost say that it is an objection to what can one person do. One person can't make a difference. And while that statement in itself is actually potentially true, it's never been just one person. So where do you think corporations fit into this based on that? Like, yes, there's a lot of things we can do as individuals, and we touched on a lot so far. So where does it go beyond individuals?
Well, I think that we have to acknowledge that in a capitalistic society, it's pretty tough to find corporations that are going to be motivated to make any kinds of changes unless, one, they're going to lose market share and money, or two, they are forced to through policy or legislation. And, we have a role in both. You can do advocacy and activism around policy and legislation. I would say right now that's kind of a tough row to hoe because there's not a lot of political will to, at least not in the US, to make those kinds of changes and put those regulations in place. And then obviously, like as individuals, what we buy makes a difference. And we're never, like you said so astutely, we're never alone. We're always like individuals, but we're a collective of individuals. So our choices roll up to become movements. I think it's really important for us to let companies know that we are watching them, that we're attentive to what they're doing. Now that sustainability is a thing and it's a trend or whatever, it's become popular. Greenwashing is at like an all-time high. So you'll see these regular run-of-the-mill traditional companies that make, for instance, like cleaners that they test on animals and swaddle in tons of plastic. And they say that, hey, here's Tom and Ashlee. They're into buying something more eco-friendly. And they'll just make a slightly less plasticky, maybe less animal testy, still shitty version of that product and slap a leaf on it and say, they're going to love it. It's going to be amazing. And that's another kind of pitfall of sustainable living, is that now greenwashing is just so rampant everywhere that it is difficult to know if you're making a truly good choice. So I think showing these companies like, you're questioning what they're doing, or you're not going to buy that product. Maybe you're going to go with a smaller company that has a much better reputation of transparency. I think that's important because that hits them where they hurt. That shows them that they're going to lose market share if they're not actually providing a product that's truly sustainable. But, are companies going to do this on their own? The answer is probably no. Unfortunately, no, because there aren't a lot of, as we see with like greenwashing, there are absolutely no penalties for making marketing claims about a product around sustainability that aren't true.
That's so
And there was a
insane.
recent,
That's always blown
isn't it
my mind.
bananas?
Yeah.
And there was a study recently of, I think it was like 2,900 consumer packaged goods at your average drugstore. So I'm talking like cleaners and beauty products and stuff like that. And they found that 98% of them featured completely unsubstantiated sustainability claims, whether they were using words like green or natural, or saying they weren't tested on animals, or saying it was post-consumer plastic, whatever it was. That 98% of those like 2,900 products were giving us bogus shit on their marketing and on their labels. And I just thought, well, that's perfectly indicative of exactly what industry does. It pivots to what it thinks our needs are, but it doesn't necessarily pivot out of like conscience. It does it because they want to make more money.
Yeah. And I think what you mentioned, transparency, that is a great way to really tackle that, because I think that there is a level of transparency that we want as human beings. And I think everyone's been stung in some way or another.
Yeah.
From non-transparency, whether that's in a relationship, whether that's with a restaurant, whether that's in whatever way. I think that is a really powerful shift that I think consumers are making, because once we really value transparency, these companies have nowhere to go. They have to be transparent.
Yep. That's an awesome way to put it too. Been stung. I mean, that's great wording for it.
Now, you mentioned, we're talking about greenwashing, which is, I think a lot of the time, a simple way to look at that is it's an overhyped product or overhyped marketing. Are there things in the sustainability world that you think are overhyped? I don't have an example in my mind, but what I mean with this question is, I think taking your Keep cup to a cafe instead of using a plastic cup, that is underhyped. That is something everyone should do. Is there something that is pinned as the holy grail, but really it's like making a little bit of difference?
I mean, I think like straws. I don't know if like in where you're at, plastic straws kind of had this. A few years ago, plastic straws became incredibly vilified in the US, which I was glad to see that, people weren't like going to bars or going to restaurants and saying, oh, I don't need a straw. But people were hyping it up like that activity was single-handedly saving the planet. And some people need straws for accessibility reasons, but I think that was a little bit like a wave that people rode, where it was helpful to show how a movement can grow really quickly among individuals, but it wasn't like a cure-all to the problem. It doesn't scratch the surface. Like it didn't, like Starbucks, for instance, stopped providing plastic straws in the US with a lot of their drinks. But instead, what they just replaced it with was a plastic lid that has a wide mouth on it that arguably uses more plastic. So it was kind of an interesting, like, oh, you played yourself, type of thing. I think also there is this mindset that, and I always tell folks when they want to be more sustainable and they ask me where to start, I say, like, you don't need to go out and buy a bunch of sustainable stuff. That's like, I think folks feel like they need like the eco-friendly starter pack. They need the tiffins and the reusable cutlery and all this stuff. And I'm like, in truth, most cutlery is reusable. Anything is if you believe. So I like to tell people, like, using what you have is actually the most sustainable thing that you can possibly do. And you don't get inducted into some kind of mythic sustainability club if you go and, buy a new shampoo bar and a this and a that. And I think folks are really conditioned to like, okay, I'm going to start this tomorrow, so I need all these supplies. And it's like, no, you actually don't. And so I think that is something that actually like social media has shown us, that if you
Mm.
want to be sustainable, because now sustainable businesses are a thing and pimping their products are a thing. And I love sustainable businesses. I have the utmost respect for them. But I think people see stuff and they're like, well, I want the perfect flat lay of the lunch situation that's eco-friendly, or the coffee situation, or the laundry situation. And I think sometimes we like, that's not the actual answer to getting involved in sustainability. It's just another distraction.
That's probably going to maybe trigger a few people there, Ashley. But I think,
I'm not saying they can't have it. I'm just saying you don't have to have
I totally get it. And I think something that's really cool that's come out as like a fashionable thing is like this rustic feel, like the
it.
rustic gang that have like these non-matching cutlery and these Tupperwares that are all
Yeah.
just all different colors and stuff that's all just, it's what we had, so it's what we're using. And that's becoming like really chic and cool,
Yeah.
which I'm really excited about. And that straw example made me think of this interview, and I have no idea what documentary I watched, but this, I think it was an environmentalist, went over to Santa Monica Beach, which is where you find all the characters. And they asked, what are you doing to curb climate change? And a really popular answer, which kind of shocked me, is, oh, I'm not using plastic straws, or I'm reducing my plastic straws. I'm like, to curb climate change, you're reducing plastic straws. And don't get me wrong, it's like the second most littered plastic item in the ocean right now. I think it was second, and then the plastic coffee cups are one of the first, and plastic bags are up there. But you're curbing climate change, literally the changing of the global climate by saying no to plastic straw, which is an important thing, but come on. It's just
Yeah.
a straw at the end of the day.
Right. And it's a great first step if that's what gets people's feet in the door to get interested. Come on through. I'm glad about it. I'll give you an aluminum straw all day. Let's go. But I do think it's a good example of kind of how something that individuals started doing caught fire. More people started doing it, and then you just kind of saw marketing around it. And like we had referendums here in the city of Chicago to ban plastic straws entirely. Now, I would have been down to clown with that. I would have liked that. But that was based upon just people kind of getting this social zeitgeist where they no longer liked straws, where they were vilifying it. So I think that's something that is a little overhyped. I mean, people also do thrift hauls. I see this all the time on social media, and I think it's really interesting. It's like folks who claim to be focused on sustainability, but then they're like, look at these 85 items I bought at the thrift store. And I'm like, shit, man, I don't know if you need all that stuff, and that's kind of that's just another side of the same coin, of overconsumption. So it is, I respect how everybody approaches sustainability. I totally get we got our own journeys. It takes all kinds, but that's another thing that I'm always like curious. Like it's just funny to me to see it.
Yeah.
I don't get it, but
I mean, funny is kind of a nice way to put it, but it's also like that emoji that's like laughing, but it's got that sweat drop, like, ha.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
We've talked about so much on this episode, from greenwashing through to being vegan, sustainability tips. There's a lot in there for someone to really take away from, which I'm really excited about. Now, I like to leave guests with a minute or two to have the platform to themselves at the end of the episode. Now, I want this to be a form of Ashlee's words of wisdom. And it could be something related to what we talked about today, or it could be something completely unrelated, something you've been thinking about for the past day or year or whatever it may be. But I want to give you the stage for 2 minutes just to speak your mind, whether that's a rant or whatever else it may be.
Well, I mean, that's a challenge right there. I think I would I'm gonna stay on message, but I feel really strongly that there is a place for absolutely everyone in the sustainability movement, not just because there should be, but because there has to be, because it's really an all hands on deck endeavor if we're going to save this planet we live on. And I feel in order to do that, we really need to welcome folks in. And this is something that I actually take some heat for sometimes. Like I do Fox News sometimes, which is a pretty conservative outlet. I've had debates with climate deniers. My family, whom I love dearly, are largely pretty conservative climate change deniers, which is interesting. It always makes for fun family gatherings. Anyway, I think it's really vitally important that when we feel like we have the stamina, that we keep an open dialogue with people who don't agree with us around climate change and kind of these things, because I think that's really the only way that like hearts and minds actually get changed. And there is so much division. There are plenty of things that I will not compromise on, ethically or issue wise. But I find a lot of times in my experience, folks who are like aren't attentive to climate change or don't think it's real, they've just been given like bad information, man. And I found actually having some open, non-judgmental, and more like coming from a curious place talks with folks like that have made more inroads and made people reciprocally more curious about why I would be so passionate about something they don't even think exists. And so I just want to urge people also, if they feel like they have the stamina and fortitude to do so, to stay open to talking with the folks who maybe don't agree with them or aren't there yet on climate change, because we really do need everybody, and we need everybody as imperfectly or as they come. And I mean, my family who doesn't believe in climate change, they recycle and they've started eating less meat. And the rationale is not that they're doing it for the planet. It's really that they've just seen me doing it and they thought, it seems like a good idea. So you just never know who you might be able to positively influence. And I think that's just an important kind of piece, is to keep an open mind when interacting with folks who might not just be quite there yet, or just are really misinformed, and not necessarily help them, but create like open dialogue so they feel comfortable enough to ask questions. Because I think that's really how we're going to bring a lot of people to the metaphorical table here.
Before I let you go, I'm actually going to dive into that just to provide a bit more value for everyone. What are the questions that you actually ask? I totally agree. I try, if someone looks at the comments, if I get I sometimes get climate deniers commenting on my social media, and I generally structure the comments in which I hope other people are looking, because I think the questions and that coming from a place of curiosity is actually super productive. So what are the questions, if you were to give us some concrete examples, maybe even, that you're asking in order to create that open dialogue?
Yeah, so I mean, it depends upon the person, but I would say, one, like where did you first hear about climate change? And what was your first introduction to it? And then since then, what has been kind of like your body of evidence that you've looked at, or where are you getting your information? And without poo-pooing that news source or whatever, then I ask, do you think you felt like the hottest summer ever? Have you experienced that? Have you experienced more hurricanes in the area where you're living? Have you, like I was talking to a farmer at one point, he was saying the drought was so extreme that his crops were, not making it. He couldn't hack it anymore. And I was asking him what he felt might be the cause of that. And he said he didn't know. He thought just, that's the way it is. Sometimes you've got hot seasons and you have less hot seasons. And I thought that was interesting, and it kind of opened the door to like more of a conversation around like, well, what does that look like for you? How long has it been like that? You obviously work the land, so you have like a pretty intimate understanding of weather and what to expect, Farmer's Almanac and all that stuff. And it's just interesting because most people I talk to get most of their information about climate change from politicians. They don't get it from scientific sources. They get it from politicians on mainstream media. And when you ask some of those questions that you seem very deft at doing as well, like I think you find that there's a way you can get people to think and maybe question some of those sources without humiliating them. Because like,
Mm.
again, we're not going to get anywhere if it's too easy in like a discussion to like insinuate someone is dumb. A lot of these folks aren't dumb. They've just been poorly informed, and maybe they're a product of their milieu. Maybe they're a product of like the people they surround themselves with, and they're all kind of hive minded about, particular, maybe conservative in this case, like philosophy. But and then I just say like, it was a really good book, and I'll maybe recommend something, or I've got to send you this article. It is like, it's amazing, if you're open to that. But I do find like folks, when you ask them where they're coming from and where they became acquainted with the term climate change and what their understanding of it is, they either don't know or they have like pretty strong feelings about it. And it gives you insight. Like, we're never going to be able to combat misinformation if we don't know how folks think who think differently than we do. And if we don't
Mm.
know where they're getting that information. And so, yeah, I mean, that was a really long-winded answer to like, what kinds
No,
of
I love
questions do
that.
you
I
ask? But
think what people should really, if anyone's going to go back to listen to a part, I think what's really important is your tone there. So when you're asking the questions, you're not saying, "Where'd you get that information from?" You're saying,
yeah,
"Where did you get that information from?" And you're coming from a place of compassion, which I think is actually super undervalued. The tone really sets, and your body language and things like this. So yes, the questions are great, and you seem to be coming from a place of optimum curiosity, and the questions are open-ended, and they are almost leading them to ask that to themselves, because maybe these are questions that they haven't asked themselves. Maybe they don't know
hmm
where they got this information from. So I think something that's underrated and I really appreciate is your tone and the way that that's actually delivered, which I think is super conducive to productive conversations.
thank you. Well, likewise, it takes a village, man.
Thanks. um, Awesome. To tie a beautiful bow on this conversation, I just want to leave with a thank you. Now, obviously, a thank you for coming on and sharing your wisdom. I hope someone has, or many people have taken something out of this conversation. But also thank you for the work that you do, not only going out there and doing the TEDx talk, which, as a side note, for anyone who wants to watch it, it is actually a good TEDx talk. I'll leave it linked in the show notes below. But
Thank
you
you.
do actually come into things with a sense of compassion and informity. And I think that is very much received on the viewer side of things. And I watched a few of your media appearances, and I think that's more of what I want in the world. So thank you for the work that you do there. It is incredibly crucial for us to transition into that cleaner, greener, more sustainable future. So thank you for all that. And again, Ashlee, for your time here today.
Oh, thank you so very much. I really genuinely appreciate you and all your work as well.
Hi there. Welcome to the end of the episode. Thank you for listening the whole way through. And thank you, Ashlee, for coming on and sharing your wisdom. The best way to support this show is twofold. One, share it to a friend, family member, colleague who you think would benefit from this conversation that we've had here today. Or two, leave a review on Spotify and Apple, or even on YouTube. Leave a like, comment, subscribe, all that stuff. But with all that being said, I will see you on next week's episode. Until then, stay happy, eat plants, peace.